はい前賛成とフレットのチャラいよブングング制服フレットのチャラいよ頑張っちゃちゃちゃとたちゃんにですよ汗よ始まりダーリンプリーズjustチャラチャラjustチャラチャラjustチャラチャラチャラチャラ
Lucky Star is one of my favorite anime, but it's really hard for me to recommend it to other people. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of people who love Lucky Star just because it's a cute, fun little slice-of-life show with likable, relatable characters and legitimately funny moments throughout, but so much of why I like the show has to do with the context that I bring into it. When I talk about Lucky Star, I don't often talk about the best scenes or the funniest moments. I talk about the people I watched it with, or the climate of the anime fandom at the time, or the fanworks that came out of it. Lucky Star to me is one of the best examples of a show that changes depending on who you are and what you bring into it, and as such is the perfect subject matter for a meditation on why context matters. For a lot of viewers, one of the funniest scenes in the early part of Lucky Star is this super intense driving scene. It's pretty funny in general, just as something random and wacky, but the main reason that so many people find it funny is because it's a stylistic parody of the racing scenes from Initial D, a famous and long-running anime and manga series.
Ugh. Reference is the lowest form of comedy.
I'm sorry, who asked you? What are you, the comedy police?
Yeah, that's the joke.
No one cares. Go away. I've never really understood the sentiment that references are somehow a lower form of comedy. Yes, they will inherently have a more limited appeal because if you don't get the reference, you might not find the joke as funny. But if you do get the reference, then a well-placed reference can not only be hilarious, but even create a sense of culture and connectivity between the audience and the work. And I don't think every work should be trying to appeal to the broadest possible audience, but they should be trying to appeal to the audience that they want to appeal to on the deepest possible level. And sometimes making references can make something appeal to someone on a more relevant level than ever before. Lucky Star is pumped full of references at pretty much all times, but all of those references have a purpose. The show is about the daily lives of 4 high school girls and their friends, and typically a person's everyday life is full of cultural nuggets and references. There's a reason that period pieces always contain nods to things that were relevant to the time period they take place in to set the stage, and Lucky Star is essentially a period piece for the year 2007. Nowhere is this more apparent than in the characterization of the hardcore otaku character Konata, who constantly makes references to anime, games, and cultural terms which were relevant to otaku at the time. Back when Lucky Star came out, much ado was made about the show's constant references to the melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. Not only was Haruhi animated by the same studio, but the voice actress who played Haruhi, Aya Hirano, also played Konata, which led to some incredible meta moments when Konata goes to see a live performance by the Haruhi voice actors, which was a real event that actually happened, and sees the cartoon version of Aya Hirano on stage. But Lucky Star's constant references to Haruhi weren't just Kyoto Animation making nods to their past work. They were relevant because Haruhi was a huge deal in otaku culture. It would arguably have been downright unrealistic to portray a hardcore otaku in 2007 who didn't know anything about Haruhi, because it was pretty much the biggest thing in otaku culture for the better part of 2 or 3 years. If you watched Lucky Star at the time it was airing and were a member of an otaku community which had been losing its shit over Haruhi for the past year, then you probably related to the show immediately. And it wasn't just Haruhi. Konata would do karaoke of the Dragon Ball Z opening or make references to old robot shows and things like that, so all kinds of anime fans had something to relate to in her, and there were plenty of general Japanese cultural references throughout the show as well. So now you can probably see how this show is difficult to recommend to people if they don't know where it's coming from. During one of the Lucky Channel segments, Minoru Shiraishi goes on this long rant about how otaku had bastardized the word tsundere, and at the time this was so relevant that people were posting it in response to others for misusing the word. But if you don't know what a tsundere is, or how its original definition had gotten bastardized by its use in describing characters like Shauna and Louise around that time, then you might not know what the hell Shiraishi is talking about, much less like someone like me would find it funny. Hell, you might not even understand what the Lucky Channel segment is about, since it was actually based on a radio show that was congruent with the Lucky Star anime. And it's not just the cultural references inside the show that matter, but the ways that the show itself influenced otaku culture in turn. Remember that that dance I was doing poorly at the start of the video, that dance is pretty entertaining on its own, but it felt even more special when you were constantly seeing videos of people performing it at home or at cons. Not to mention the fact that Haruhi's ending theme dance had been famous just a year prior. The icing on the cake for me was Shiraishi Minoru performing his terrible half-assed version of the opening in one of the later ending videos, at a point when the opening had already become famous in its own right. This show was basically referencing its own relevance while it was still airing. Lucky Star was one of the first anime series that I ever tried to watch weekly as it was coming out back in early 2007, and initially I dropped it after 11 episodes because I got bored with it. Even when I completed it months later after it had already finished airing, I just wasn't that into it, but over time I started seeing all this fan art and all this cool doujinshi and just other great fan creations, and the show took root in my mind. So by the time that I rewatched it in 2008, it actually ended up being one of my favorites. Which brings me to the subject of personal context as well. Oftentimes the reasons we love a show have to do with the context in which we watched them previously. For some people, scenes like the Shiraishi Minoru rant might seem dated and irrelevant, but to me it invokes nostalgia for the anime fandom as I experienced it back in 2007. Lucky Star lets me reminisce about my early days as a hardcore otaku back when that word meant a lot to me, when the life of collecting figures and DVDs and manga was as big a deal to me as it was to Konata. It's like a time capsule of how I saw otaku culture in 2007. But there's also the more literal context that I watched the show in. Back in 2007 and in 2008 when I marathoned the show, I did so with my best friend, whom I actually met because he came to school one day with a little Lucky Star booklet thing. He was the first anime fan I had ever met that had actually seen more shows than me, and we marathoned Lucky Star together both times. The second time we did so while on the couch looking at a big screen, entombed in a mountain of Mountain Dew, and we were looking at a guide on the Anime Suki forums which explained every reference in the show. So anytime we saw something we didn't understand, we'd pause the show and read the guide, and that was one of the best anime viewing experiences I've ever had. And then in 2011, I also took a trip to the Philippines for a month and stayed with an anime blogger named Ghost Lightning, who's also one of my best friends. And there was one day when we went to a toy fair and we bought tons of anime merch, and we came home with two other anime bloggers who we were hanging out with at the toy fair, and we all played a drinking game while watching Lucky Star, and we only made it through like 3 or 4 episodes before we were all shit-faced drunk, but that was the first time I ever got drunk while watching Lucky Star with all these, anime blogger friends from the Philippines. So that was also one of the best viewing experiences I've ever had. So how exactly can I go about recommending this show to people? Sure, there's the memorable and lovable characters, the incredible design sense which brings the world to life by featuring real locations and outfits, the legitimately funny bits, the awesomely relatable bits, the comfy tone, the cute girls. I mean, Lucky Star is a great show in its own right, and I'm sure a lot of people like it without any context at all. But so much of why I love the show has to do with the time and place that it was released, the people I watched it with, and the culture surrounding it, that I can hardly imagine what it would be like to watch it fresh in 2014 without any context going into it. I also wonder to what extent someone like me explaining the context in which I appreciate something can help other people to appreciate it more. A lot of people say that explaining the joke will ruin it, or that you can't really enjoy something you didn't experience yourself, but I disagree. I tend to do a lot of research on stuff before I consume it, and I often like to know how other people reacted or what context it was originally released in. Now, I'm not saying that me talking about my experiences watching the show in the Philippines are going to help you to enjoy it anymore, but I do think that maybe if I sat down with someone and explained things that were going on in the show to them, and they were the type of person who's receptive to that kind of thing, maybe it would help them to enjoy it more. That might be me saying that if you scream at your monitor loud enough, maybe I'll do Lucky Star commentaries in the future, but who knows. For now, I just hope that I've helped you to appreciate how much context informs your opinion of a work, and that's it.
I don't know, it's